That's exactly why a young trans woman would want that though, right? Because she doesn't want the effects of that testosterone.
Right.
Right? So, like, how do you handle that? Because that is, like you said, that's a permanent effect. That's not going away, right? Like, the gravel in my voice is here because of the fact that I went through that first T-puberty, right? So, like,
Yeah.
how do you, like, mitigate the fact that long-term damage can be done through inaction or through, like, action in the case of, like, trans men?
Yes, as far as hormones go, that one's a really tough one to navigate because the hormones do help you feel so good. As a trans girl, when I first started taking hormones, it was so euphoric. It felt so amazing. My breasts started to grow and be sensitive, and that was affirming to who I felt I was, and that was amazing. But I guess the issue I see is the hormones do cause changes in the body, and that's why we take them as a trans person, to cause those changes that we want. But I think for a trans girl to take hormones, if you're born male and take female hormones, it causes your breasts to form, it might cause your bones to decrease, muscle mass to decrease. But for trans men, that is where I see more people detransitioning now, having long-term effects from taking hormones that they can't undo. And so like young teenagers that got on testosterone and their voice lowers and they develop all this body hair and things that the body hair might go away, but their voice never goes away. Their low voice never goes away even after they stop hormones. And so I guess where my feelings are on that matter is that if you are still not an adult yet, even hormones have a certain element of permanence to them. Permanent effect, especially depending on how long they're taken. So I guess
that's exactly why a young trans woman would want that though, right? Because she doesn't want the effects of that testosterone. Right? So, like, how do you handle that? Because that is, like you said, that's a permanent effect. That's not going away, right? Like, the gravel in my voice is here because of the fact that I went through that first T-puberty, right? So, like,
yeah,
how do you, like, mitigate the fact that long-term damage can be done through inaction or through, like, action in the case of, like, trans men?
So, yeah, if the long-term damage comes from inaction, if a teenager fully identifies with the gender that they feel they are, then affirming care, hormones and things feels right and makes them feel right, and they'll be happier for as long as that's the right thing to do. But then I bring myself back to the possibility that what if they start hormones at 16 years old and it causes permanent changes, and then when they're 20, they decide, oh shoot, I never should have done that. But now they've been taking hormones for 4 years or whatever and had the effects on their body. So it's a real tricky thing to navigate whether this is going to stay or not. Obviously, if the person's going to stay identifying that way forever, then living true to who they feel they are is the right thing to do so they can be happy and feel good about themselves. But then there's the problem in situations like mine, where I thought I was going to be that way forever, and I welcomed the permanent changes to my body, but then it changed. And so when it comes to teenagers, I want them to be the happiest they can possibly be and feel good about themselves. And if that means taking hormones early on, that's great on one hand, but still I recognize the possibility that because they're not fully formed yet, their brain doesn't fully form until they're like 25. And so to make such a decision that has permanent elements to it, I feel is really risky, and that perhaps the answer, like clearly in my case, the answer would have been better to convince me I wasn't actually trans early on before I did those things to myself. But you can't say, and that's where I have to be careful, because I can't go around saying that nobody should ever transition, no teenager should ever be given hormones, because each person is their own unique experience.
Yeah.
If that feels in every way right to you, I just recognize the potential that someday it might be realized that maybe I shouldn't have taken those hormones early on. And that is all I want my story to help people become aware of, that possibility, not that you never should, the transition should never happen. It's a real tricky thing to navigate.
Yeah, I can definitely resonate with that. And I think one thing that sticks out that you've said is that, like, part of the reason why you felt so uncomfortable as a trans woman is due to how visible you were as one, which is something that I feel anxiety about as well, even though I transitioned at a younger age, right? But, like, even with me transitioning at 20, there's still, like, you know, there's testosterone effects. There's years of testosterone. But then, like you mentioned, maybe if you weren't 26 when you learned about trans people, is the way I'll phrase that. If you had been younger, right? Like, maybe it would have been a different story. But then it seems like a lot of people want these teenagers to be forced into the same position as like you or me, right? So like I feel like this is a big catch-22 where it almost feels like they actually don't want trans people to be happy because they're unhappy when they're clockable, and they get more clockable the longer they're on T. So specifically speaking about trans femme people, right? But like, do you get where I'm coming from there? So like, it feels weird when you're like, don't do anything, just cook on T. But then also, if you cook on T, you're gonna be more unhappy. So also, on the same token, on the off chance that you're part of the like 2% that detransitions as like trans women, because I'm not speaking about trans men. I don't know enough about the stats about trans men, but I know that most trans women don't detransition except for like societal hate. And why do they get societal hate? Because they are like visibly trans and people don't really like trans people. So like, I guess all I'm saying is that sometimes it feels like people want trans people to be forced to deal with the hate, and they want to be able to like hate them. And that's the whole reason why they're like, no, I'm not gonna let my kid transition. Not because they hate their kid, but like they don't want their kid to be some freak, for lack of a better term.
Isn't it a really twisted thing that the majority of people that hate trans people or put out so much hatred towards them, if they were to become friends with someone that passed and they had no idea this person was trans, they would just accept it.
They would be friends.
Uh-huh. But
they would have no clue.
I've always called it the ew factor, or that's weird. Anything that causes someone to go, ew, what's going on here? That man is dressed like a woman. This weirds me out. I feel uncomfortable about this. And that's within you. If you feel uncomfortable about it, that's because what you believe, and you believe it's wrong for this person to be presenting this way. Not
everybody else is just a mirror of how you feel. So if you feel disgusted, it's in here. It's not over there.
Yes.